London is a city that's constantly evolving. Warehouses being turned into flats. It can seem like the whole place is in constant flux. But in these programmes, we're going to be tracking down some of the people and places that give this city its unique character and remind us of the past. This week on Disappearing London, I'm taking a stroll along the most famous street in British musical history. I'm visiting one of London's last traditional pub gyms. But first, I'm heading for South London. This is Electric Avenue in Brixton, which got its name because it was the first street in London to be lit by electricity. But I'm here in Brixton to find out about a slightly older form of power. Brixton's a pretty busy and cosmopolitan sort of place these days, but in the mid-1800s, it wasn't really part of London at all. It was a village surrounded by fields and farms. But as the population grew, Brixton was swallowed up by the expanding capital. The city slowly crept up Brixton Hill, gobbling up the fields and pastures. But tucked away just around the corner is a rather beautiful little reminder of those far-off and slightly gentler times. And here it is, the Brixton Windmill, a solitary survivor from Brixton's rural past.
Hello, Suggs. Welcome to the Brixton Mill.
Hi, Richard. What an extraordinary sight.
It is. It's absolutely extraordinary. And to think that we have a building like this, a windmill in Brixton, you know, in such a built-up local area.
How did you come across it?
Well, I'm a local resident. I live in Brixton. And I grew up around the mill, you know. One day I was passing the mill and I just thought, what a sorry sight. You know,
No, I've got to say, the only windmills I was aware of in London was a theatre of semi-naked women and a couple of pubs, yeah.
Well, this windmill is basically the last of 12 mills.
In this area?
In this area. Its historical name is called John Ashby's Mill.
Who was John Ashby?
John Ashby was an Irish Quaker, as far as we know, and he is known as the first mill of Brixton Hill.
And when was this built?
It was constructed in 1816.
Yeah. Of course, at a time when this would have been rural countryside, not the urban Brixton we know today.
Absolutely. I mean, all of this was farmland. You would have had fig trees, you know, hyacinths flourished here in its heyday. It was a real little commercial centre.
Would it be possible to have a look inside?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
The mill ground flour for the Brixton locals until the 1860s. By then, it was surrounded by new buildings which cut out the wind and stopped the sails from turning. So the Ashby family upped sticks to Mitcham and built a new mill there. Until a couple of years ago, the deserted mill had been left derelict and unloved. But then Richard and other locals stepped in to save it. So what have we got here then?
Right, now this is the stone floor. I regard this floor as the heart of the mill. This is where everything happened. This is where the main milling took place. The wheel that we see at the top of us, this is called the great spur wheel.
And this would have obviously been driven by the sails?
Absolutely. It takes its drive and power from the sails, from what we call the sweeps in this part of the world. And this engages, it's called a stone nut. It engages with the actual spur wheel. And this is the hopper. This is where grain would have been fed, and all types of grain, whatever you wanted to mill. It would come down the shoe.
And into these enormously heavy stones?
Yeah. Yeah, they are really heavy, and they really were built to last.
Marvellous. So what else have we got up here?
Right. Now, the next floor is called the bin floor. And this is where all the wheat and various sacks of grain were stored in the old days, ready to go down for milling.
There's a fair chunk of wood, the prop shaft here.
Yeah, this is from 17th century shipyards.
And yet more stairs.
And this floor is called the dust floor.
So phew, we're at the very top of the mill. And some mighty fine looking machinery up here, Richard.
It certainly is. I would regard this as the brain or the head of the mill. This is where it all happens.
You can really imagine this whole place throbbing and vibrating with the energy that goes going, man.
Once this is going, I think that you'd have a lot of vibrations in the building. We have the brake wheel, the wallower, the wind shaft, all of them are cast iron structures. We have the sack hoist here.
The sack hoist? You didn't tell me there was a lift. Do you think if I hang on, I'll be able to get back down to the bottom?
Definitely.
If Richard and his friends have their way, it won't be long before the sails start to turn once more. The Friends of Windmill Gardens are raising funds to restore the mill to full working order. and they want the park it sits in to become a meeting place for Brixton residents, a small slice of the countryside in the hurly-burly of the city. Well, if old Miller Ashby came back to Brixton today, he'd be in for a bit of a shock. The farms and pastures of his day, long since covered in tarmac and concrete. But if he did make it up to Brixton Hill, I'm sure he'd be more than pleased to see one piece of rural Brixton that hadn't disappeared. I've always been a big fan of the traditional London boozer, but it's not always what goes on downstairs in the public bar that makes these places interesting. The Half Moon in Herne Hill, a normal pub like you'd find in any street in London, full of people enjoying a pint or two, but upstairs it's strictly teetotal. This is the domain of Clinton Mackenzie. He used to be a professional boxer with a string of titles to his name. When he retired from the ring, he wanted to stay involved with the sport he loved. So here we are, Clinton. How did you end up here?
I retired from boxing, looking for something to do. And I passed this place time and time again, going to the gym. And one day I stopped. And the manager downstairs said, "Is it available?" And I came up, and it was all cobwebs everywhere, nothing around. I thought, this is the place. Tell her, the only thing that was there was a ring.
That was still there, yeah.
The ring was there.
Like the ghost of the old days,
well,
yeah.
And I looked at that and I thought, this is it. It's been 10 years now.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, it's the best thing I've ever done.
What was your first experience of pub gyms?
Well,
Did you train in them as a kid yourself?
Well, I used to go along there, you weren't supposed to.
Yeah.
Because the professionals were there. And like amateurs not supposed to train pros. And I used to train with them and everything, yeah? And it was great, the atmosphere, to see the famous fighters, and, you know, you go up and shake their hands and everything. And because it was like a pub environment, it was a good feeling. You know, a lot of people respect that.
There were once hundreds of small pub gyms like Clinton's all across London. The most famous of them all was the Thomas à Becket in the Old Kent Road. This was the place where legendary fighters like Henry Cooper plied their trade. But the Thomas à Becket recently closed and the gym's been turned into a modern art gallery. It's a similar story across London, as pubs get redeveloped or landlords reclaim the floor space for their paying customers.
When the Thomas à Becket went, it was
unbelievable.
It was unbelievable. I mean, there it was, this famous pub with this famous boxing gym at the top. Muhammad Ali trained there, Sugar Ray Robinson, all the great fighters, Henry Cooper, you name them. Frank Bruno, everyone trained there. And all of a sudden, it's gone.
Of course, not everyone shares Clinton's enthusiasm for professional boxing. But gyms like his aren't just for kids who dream of becoming world champions.
I don't teach violence, but I do teach self-defence. You know, people, you look after yourself, you get fit, you see the world through a different light then. A few years ago, there was like a 16-year-old kid come in. He's about 17 stone, big kid. He's only 16. He goes, "I'll knock you out." And I went, all right. I said, "Go on, get in the ring." I tell you what, he learnt a thing or two in there. Couldn't lay a glove on me, right? I tell you, that kid is such a... You never realise he's such a nicest kid now you can ever wish to meet. That changed his life.
Let's introduce the only public house cum boxing club in the United Kingdom. Although you might think there's nothing terribly unusual about this scene, a gymnasium with dozens of healthy youngsters...
The idea of using boxing to teach kids a few life skills is nothing new, although this pub in South London maybe went a bit too far when it came to keeping youngsters off the streets. Training at Clinton's place is a far more orderly affair, and it's not just a man's sport anymore. Angel's been a regular here for a couple of years, and she's recently started to win trophies of her own. Thanks to a clause in his lease, Clinton's regulars can look forward to plenty more pummelling and sparring. Even if the landlord wanted to convert the gym into something different, he's not allowed to. Which is good news for Clinton's top trainers.
There's a very special atmosphere in here. You meet people and it's a bunch of friends. People open out to people. You feel at ease, you feel at home.
It's a real part of the community around here, yeah.
Oh, very much so. It's a place for me where I can come and relax and enjoy myself.
And be amongst people who have the same interests as you, yeah.
That's right. That's the key thing, the same interest.
I think it's put far more youngsters on the right road than the wrong road. Boxing's not perfect, you know, kids who do boxing aren't perfect, but no one's perfect, are they, in any walk of life. But I think it does far more good than harm. You'll never get it 100%, you know, but I think, on balance, it does a lot more good than harm.
Why do you think it's important that we keep this particular place?
Well, because it's a brilliant place to come to. It does so much for people. They get in great mental and physical shape through it. Mental health, physical health, and a good atmosphere. It takes all the stress away. You come here and you're in another world. So it's very, very important. Health of mind and body. That's the importance.
Sounds good to me. Either one of them would do me, yeah. Both would be tremendous. Coming up next, a stroll down London's Tin Pan Alley. And making music 60s style. Nice. I've come to Denmark Street, or Tin Pan Alley as it's sometimes called. For many of us, this is the spiritual home of British pop. The list of stars who've beaten a path to this small but perfectly formed street of dreams is as endless as a progressive rock guitar solo from the early 70s. But some people are worried about its future. How long can it hold off the advance of the coffee giants and the rest, eager to stake their claim on this prime bit of London real estate? Or will the street adapt and survive, just as it has done so many times before? Denmark Street's musical roots go back to the days of music hall. Back then, it was a regular haunt for the big stars of the day who came here in search of new material. They bought their songs from the many music publishers who'd set up shop on the street, eager to exploit the talents of hard-up songwriters. Cliff Cooper's responsible for the way the street looks today, having opened the majority of music shops in Tin Pan Alley over the last 35 years. He's passionate about the street and its history.
Denmark Street's probably only about 100 yards long and, architecturally it's nothing special. But history-wise, it's very, very important and very exciting. In the early days, in the 1900s, even late 19th century, there were shops in Denmark Street just the same as there are now, but they had pianos in the windows, and it was where all the music publishers really collected. What would happen in those days, this was before copyright laws, people would write songs and they would go into the shop, play it on the piano, and then they would sell the song outright to the publisher. And that went on to about 1911 when the Copyright Acts came in, which gave a songwriter life of copyright, and 50 years thereafter, after he died. And that changed the whole business.
From the 1920s onwards, Denmark Street was swarming with songwriters employed by the publishing houses to write hit tunes. The street was christened Tin Pan Alley, in homage to Manhattan's musical neighbourhood. Apparently, the racket produced by all those different tunesmiths banging away on their pianos in their rehearsal rooms sounded like the noise of pots and pans being crashed together.
The artists, they were always looking for good songs. Good songs were the ingredients for a hit. And they would come to Denmark Street, go into the various publishing houses, looking for songs, and there'd be pianists in the actual publishing houses that would play the piano, sing the song, and if the artist liked it, then they get the music out to them and they'd record it.
It's a friendly street, with each house, each paving stone a rendezvous. Johnny Johnson, leader of the keynotes, holds highway conference with songwriter Tommy Connor, while old-timer Harry Davidson, sung by Dick Royal and the Beverly Sisters, are hot on the trail of a new song, Born.
Although artists would choose their songs in Denmark Street, it wasn't where they were recorded. At the time, recording studios were the preserve of music industry giants such as EMI and Decca. But the emergence of rock and roll changed all that. Suddenly, performers began writing their own songs and independent studios set up business on the street. This was once home to the legendary Regent Sound Studios, the very place that the Rolling Stones cut their first disc many, many moons ago. And just along here is where the Sex Pistols had their offices and rehearsal rooms until they found the £4 a week rent a bit too steep. And right here was home to the legendary Gioconda Cafe, where young boys and girls came and drank frothy coffee and dreamed of pop stardom. It was also where jobbing musicians would come to find out about the next gig. It was basically like a rock and roll job centre. Sadly, the recording studios have all but disappeared from Denmark Street. Regent Sound, the most famous of the lot, and the place where the Stones began to roll, is now a guitar shop. Although the owners have lovingly restored the original shop sign in homage to its past. But there is one surviving studio on the street. Tin Pan Alley Studio may not be as famous as some of the others, but it's had its share of rock's glitterati through its doors over the years. Steve Kent is the studio's current owner. So Steve, what is the story of this studio?
Yeah, this studio has been going for just over 50 years. It was started by a guy called Ralph Edelman, the jazz violin player, who subsequently played on Beatles recordings at Abbey Road, I Am the Walrus, and a couple of other tracks. Everything from Matt Monro to Shawaddy Waddy used to record here. Small Faces, The Who, obviously at very early stages of their careers, when they were at the Denmark Street sort of stage of their careers.
And how is it making a living out of a studio like this?
It's very hard. It used to be easy. It used to be too easy because if you wanted to record anything at all, you had no choice but to go to a recording studio. So studios were busy 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. With the advent of computers and home recording solutions, things have changed, things have got a lot tighter.
And the bills to pay, of course.
The bills indeed. The rent and rates here, as you know, in the West End, are absolutely phenomenal. Yet studio rates themselves are falling. But it's still music I'm at. And I intend to be here for another 10 years doing the same thing, come what may.
I hope so too. Denmark Street without a recording studio would be like rock without the roll. The equipment Steve uses is light years away from what we'd have found here 40 years ago. But if you want to see what those studios in Denmark Street would have looked like in the 1960s, this is the place to come. A place I've got a great deal of fondness for. In fact, I've been doing some recording here quite recently. The lovely Bakelite headphones. And of course the drum kit already set up. Like all 60s studios, the drummer would play the kit that was here. And look at this beautiful character-filled piano. In fact, the very piano that Madness recorded their first single on. But if you want to see where the really interesting stuff goes on, it's over there through the glass. Toe Rag Studios in Hackney is not a museum, it's a very successful working studio. Owner Liam Watson prefers the live sound of recordings from the 50s and 60s. This is reflected in the fantastic array of vintage analogue equipment he uses. And for extra authenticity, he even wears a lab coat, just like the technicians of yesteryear. How have you come about this stuff?
Well, I've been collecting gear since I was at school, really, you know, and getting interested in music and got guitars, and it kind of evolved out of that.
And this desk, for instance, where did this come from?
Well, this desk came from Abbey Road. It was a series of desks that Abbey Road used through the 50s and 60s, made by their in-house engineering department, and it's called a RED series desk, which stood for Record Engineering Development Department.
So the great Beatles themselves may have had their dulcet tones through this?
Very probably, although unfortunately we'll never know because they didn't really take notes of which desk did
But we'll
what.
make the presumption that they
Yeah,
did.
let's make the presumption that they did, yeah.
And just take us through a little bit what it does.
Well, what you'd do is you'd have a microphone plugged in the studio there, and it would come up on the patch bay here. Then you would connect the microphone to the channel here. In fact, we have a microphone plugged in on this channel here, which this is the talkback microphone, so I can talk to the musicians. I can. Okay, that's coming through from the other rooms. It's quite good. Like, I can hear it. I feel a bit more powerful.
While Liam takes me on a magical mystery tour of his mixing desk, I'm beginning to wish I was on the other side of the glass. It's all far too technical for me. That's why I became a singer. Now, what question can I ask Liam to make him think I've understood anything of what he's just told me? Ah, I know. And yes, just to sum it up, I mean, this desk is no worse than stuff that you can get now that has 55,000 microchips in it.
That's probably better.
I think I got away with that one.
Sonically than most.
Whilst Liam still fights the corner for traditional recording methods, back in Denmark Street, most of the old studios have been put out of business by the changing fashions in the music industry. But what about the future? Can the most famous music street in the world hold on to that accolade? Or is the street as we know it under threat?
I think there is probably a threat to the street. It's, as I said before, architecturally, it's not a great street to look at, but nevertheless, you know, rents are going up all the time, and the music shops can only sustain a certain level of rent. And I think it's important for councils over London to make sure that they do preserve it's like Denmark Street. New Bond Street is fashion, Oxford Street, all these streets have an identity, and if commercial money dictates that they should close, I think it would be bad for London and bad for everybody in general, and tourism especially.
Next time on Disappearing London, I'm taking a canter through the story of a horse-drawn city. Remembering the days when motoring through the capital was actually fun, and discovering why this theatre was built in a Victorian hospital.